Hey guys, how you going? My wife just told me she was gonna punch me in the fucking face.
No, I said I was gonna punch you in the face, not the fucking face, okay?
Oh, damn. Don't worry, we're not getting domestic here. We just got a good sense of humor. So, I'm enjoying a beer. It's kind of this is all I'm doing today. This is all I can do. I went and I picked up the gaskets at the local speed shop, which is about an hour from me. Kind of ironic to call it local, but it's a great little speed shop. If you're in the Chicagoland area, the Winter Circle in Joliet is really good. And if you're closer to the south side, then you go to Canola's Automotive, which is also a great shop. When we got a lot of stuff that we were working on Project Enron. So anyway, I went and I got these gaskets. They're the Edelbrock ones. They had a few options, but I talked to the guy, told him what I had going on, and then we kind of talked about it. And we agreed that probably running with your base series Edelbrock intake gaskets for their aluminum heads would be the best choice, because most aftermarket offshore heads usually kind of mimic Edelbrock. So I want to show you guys something. I have my wife. So, you know, if you've done Fords, they got these little locking tabs, right, that let you locate the gasket so that it doesn't move. Well, you can see there's a gross mismatch in that position. Even if you bring it up, there's no good way around it. So this is stuff you guys got to check. That would be a huge obstruction in airflow, and that's not good. So I cut the tabs off, and I'm going to have to glue them in place, right? But these ports are nice and open, and you can see here the obstruction in the gasket. You should be able to see the little edges of the port, just very little. You know, to make sure. If it's a little bit bigger, it's fine. If it's tighter and it's obstructing the airflow, that is no good, because at that point, you're not only creating turbulence as the air is going in, but you're creating air doesn't like to turn. So when the air doesn't turn, it's creating a lot of not happiness in the runner. So I already cut two. You can tell the difference between the two. If you follow the print seal on there, you can see the difference. And we almost cut it right up to the print seal. I had to cut into it a little bit on the one side. You see maybe like a 16th compared to this side on the inside. But you can see the difference in the port. So now I could port this manifold. And I'll show you guys here. We're just going to lay this gasket on here. Right. There we go. So you could see the difference in the ports, but the port is smaller than the intake port, but we're not creating an obstruction. So that's the important part. If I was to be completely anal retentive here, I would port the intake, but due to the nature of this build, we're not going to do that. But the right way to do it is, all right, so you got your gasket, you locate it. And in this case, you use something you can remove. So you can use a little high tack, a little gasket cinch, a little dab to hold the gasket in place. And then you grab like some Prussian blue, and then you put it on the port. Once you've opened up your gasket to the size that you need, you put that Prussian blue nice and neat around your gasket. And you need both gaskets for this. You don't need to do it, you need to do this with both. So you do both sides, you put them on there, you get both your gaskets cut to the port to match it. That's actually port matching. But you also got to worry about port alignment. And this is where it's going to matter, because as soon as you put the Dychem, the Prussian blue, whatever you're going to use to pattern your intake, it's going to show you. So you're going to have the indentation of color on there. And essentially what you're going to have is a impression around the areas that you can scribe and grind into for your porting. So it's kind of hard to explain to you guys exactly without like visualizing it, but essentially what you're doing is you're transferring this pattern to the intake flange so that you know how much material to take off to open it up. Now another thing to consider is what your intake gaskets will compress a little bit, so that height might change slightly. And so that's why there's a lot of, you are going to have to torque your intake down evenly to get that impression of the material on there. But this is the pretty much like the most proper way to do it. It's pretty much the only way to do it because your height will change. Now, what I did this years ago when my buddy was porting the intake and the heads for me. We had to come out here and do it. What we found out is there was a casting shift. So in that casting shift, what we found out is that on the driver's side bank, the intake was obstructing the heads were becoming an obstruction. So we had to shift that opening on the intake manifold, open it forward. And on the opposite side, it was towards the back. Don't know how many people have come across that on the Holly Street Dominator intake for the Oldsmobile, but that's what we found out. And, you know, I'm going to go ahead and put the other gasket on here, and I'll show you guys some pretty neat stuff that you usually don't get to see. Now, an intake like this is more race-oriented, but, so we're going to put it in there. I'm going to line it up as best as we can. All right, and my wife is going to turn on the flash on my camera. Right, and make sure your bolt holes are good, not butt holes, bolt holes. And we are going to have a little bit of an, you know, I still have to glue the intake gasket. So disregard the location of the gasket for now, but it has to be in place. So I'm going to go ahead and take the phone from my wife.
Your battery's too low.
Oh, apparently my battery is too low. So she's going to turn on her flashlight because now we're over here dicking around. And she's going to take her phone and put it in there. I can't get the light exactly that I need. So you guys can see the valve right there, right? Okay, so that is about as ideal as it gets out of airflow. The air is going directly into the port of in the valve. There's some areas that you could open up on this. You know, obviously these heads will need porting to take full advantage of them. But there's a couple of areas down here I could see you could probably remove material. But I think that a water jacket runs through here. And you can only go so much. But now the most important part so I relate this to Oldsmobiles. There's a short side radius. It's like a dog leg. Air does not like to turn. So usually, like on Oldsmobiles, you don't want to touch the floor. You want to open up the roof because the more you open up the roof, the more that, you know, air is going to take the path of least resistance. At least the best that I know, what I've retained from hanging out with my buddy Dave is that air doesn't like to turn. So when you raise the roof on a cylinder head like that, you're straightening out the airflow and the floor becomes dead. At that point, it's almost like, you know, you can weld up the floor to straighten it out. You can weld up the material on the intake. But the most important part is to raise the roof usually. So like on these heads, I believe he said he raised the roof like, I think almost 1/8 of an inch, something like that. And again, that's to straighten out the airflow because the short side radius is so tight that if going down on the floor is pretty much going to create like a ramp almost. So you really want to open up to kind of overcome that. And when I'm talking about the short side radius, again, without having a cylinder head handy, it's hard to explain, but the area under the valve from the intake port, that would be your short side radius. And on Oldsmobiles, it's very tight. On these cylinder heads are obviously a high performance. They're pro comps, but they're patterned after like an Edelbrock, so they're pretty ideal. I don't know the flow numbers, but they're very nice. And I'm sure somebody who knows these cylinder heads knows all the weak areas and the good areas and whatnot. But either way, for our purpose, we're not going to worry about the difference between the intake and the cylinder heads because it's not creating a restriction. If anything, it's opening up a little bit, which also isn't the greatest, but it's not going to create a restriction. So either way, I'll let you guys go and I'll get this buttoned up and we'll make another video when I'm done with it. Alright guys, so the intake is on, and much like the rest of my life, sometimes I have to deal with mediocrity. There's one fucking bolt where I had to use a stack of washers to make it work. Not to mention, we were shy 5 bolts on this goddamn kit that's supposed to be for this engine. So, but everything else matches, and that back one, get buried. So either way, and no, I couldn't cut it down. The shank on the bolt, was just too long, so I had to make up for it. So either way, it's on. It looks good. It looks great. This engine is really starting to come together. Things that we still need is, one, I'm on the hunt for a thermostat housing for this. I need rocker arms. I need push rods, which I actually think I might have a set here that will work for it. And then really, that's about it. I have the carburetor. I need a distributor. I have some plug wires I can use. Again, trying to keep it cheap, so I'm just going to buy a cheap Amazon $50 distributor. I know some guys are out there probably shaking their fucking heads, but ultimately, the goal is to sell this engine as a really good runner. If somebody wants to stick it in their car, this thing should have a bunch of power as it is. I think, honestly, for this setup, if this engine makes like 380, 390, it would be really good. Again, there's nothing really exotic here. It's just a really good bunch of combinations. It might make closer to 4. I'm not the biggest Ford guy. I don't know what to expect. With my Oldsmobile, I've had a lot of experience with different engine combinations and ET where I can kind of guess whatever engine I'm going to do is going to make, relatively speaking. And I think that this engine, at minimum, should be good for 390. And that's pretty good. I mean, it's a 347. I think making 390 is really good. But it might be a little bit more than that. And the only reason why I say that is because, I didn't go through the trouble of port matching the intake to the heads. You guys saw earlier that it was pretty good, but I'm going to follow that up and show you guys the reality of what happens when you tighten down an intake. So, again, it's just, my buddy had all this stuff lying around. There was a project, 10 plus years ago, and he just, with a kid, they just had their firstborn. My best friend and his fiance, they just had their firstborn, and he sees this as, maybe somebody wants to pick this up and he can put a little money in his pocket for him and his family, projects, whatever, and just he's got no Fords to put this in pretty much, so he just needs to get rid of it, and it together is probably the biggest bang for the buck versus apart. So either way, without further ado, I'll show you guys the reality of it. So when you tighten down an intake, and I was very optimistic on this, the intake will drop. And what you see there is, not quite, I'd call that maybe like 1/10 of an inch, not 1/8. That's not the greatest. So in this situation, what you would do is you would have to match the heads to it, but this intake is not matched to the heads very properly. It's a different port layout, like I mentioned earlier. The ports on this are a little bit more oval, where these are a little bit more square. And again, these are kind of like offshore parts, so you kind of get what you pay for. So this is also really good to explain that. And, as far as building the engine, we've measured everything out. I probably could have gone through the heads and done a better job of checking the guides. There's, check the guides for straightness, to check the guide clearance. But those are little things that I'll be able to show you guys on the 350 Olds. So either way, this is almost ready to get buttoned up, and it's going to get shelved until I can come up with I think I need about $300 for the parts. And, it's not a lot of money, but I'm going to accumulate it, get everything together. I told my buddy I'd take care of the parts, and I'm going to make good on that. And then when he sells it, whatever he gets, we'll split the difference. And, I'm not charging him any labor or anything. Again, I give a lot of work away to my friends because I love them. And when you got good friends, you will not fail. Case in point, this car, anything I've ever done, I've had help, advice, guidance, you name it, from my friends. So either way, I'm going to take a little minute. I know this video is long. If you've fucking stuck with me, thank you so much. So we're going to build the engine. I talked to my buddy Dave. If you guys are Oldsmobile guys and you go over on classicoldsmobile.com, and you look up the home porting techniques thread. It's a cylinder head porting thread over on the race side of the forum. My heads may have been one of the first subjects that he did on that thread, and it's epic. A lot of good info. So I talked to him about what I had going on with the engine. First and foremost, he absolutely hated my choice in intake. But again, I want a stock looking engine. I'm going to try everything in my power to use a lot of that theory to port the critical areas of the intake. We're not going to go with a lot porting because, again, I'm going to have a camshaft under 500 lift. So really, we're going to be doing like a bowl blend. We're going to teardrop the guide, hit the short side radius a little bit, open up the intake a little bit on the roof and match the intake to the heads and do all that good stuff. And we're going to do all the, the Prussian blue and everything once we get the block set up. So if anybody needs a heater and you're close to Chicago, that's a heater and AC unit I got. It's out of a hotel and it works. Those things are awesome if you've ever stayed in a hotel. So either way. So yeah, we're going to hit this up very close. Maybe next week I'll actually dig into it and take it apart and we'll see what everything looks like and we'll start on that. But before we do that, my demons are getting the best of me and it's very hard to get away from trying to make this car fast, which is what I love to do. I love this car. It's so much fun because this has been the learning bed for everything I've ever learned in hot rodding. So what you see here is what I've been able to learn and put together. And I have had help with, from my friends. Again, good friends will not let you fail. And sometimes I'm a little bit stubborn. And my friends know that very well, but it's all for good reason. I'm the one that I embrace taking things with a grain of salt. And sometimes that when you have friends that are older, it's conflictive because sometimes when you got friends that are older, it's do as I say, take my advice, believe me later, blah, blah, blah. I err on the side of caution along with their advice. And trust me, I've butted heads with a lot of my friends over this, but it's for good reason. I have a certain way I like to do my work. So without further ado, I'll hit you guys on this because I don't want to keep this longer than 20 minutes and we're hitting on that threshold. So I talked with my buddy JJ. He knows that the bumper and the brackets, lightweight bumper brackets, and if I go to a fiberglass bumper, they're good for 45 pounds. I know my exhaust is very heavy. My exhaust is close to 70 pounds. I used to drop my mufflers at the track, and right there, that was like 50 pounds off of it. But I'm talking about dropping the X-pipe and everything all together and redoing my exhaust. So my goal is to try to shed 150 pounds on a very light budget. And that means that we're going to attack this core support with a hole saw. I'm going to cut a lot of this off. I'm going to use thin gauge rod because these grills don't weigh anything. There's no need for all this excessive sheet metal. So we're going to come up with something. My buddy JJ said he's got a core support that he can let me have. And we're going to rework that one. And I'm also going to make a jig from it to maybe attempt at making an aluminum one down the road if I'm that ambitious. But we're going to find out how much weight we can take off of the stock core support. And then when I put the one that I've cut up in there, we're going to use mine for a jig because mine's actually in really, really good shape. Mine's actually a really nice one. I got it from a junkyard and that car sat in there since 1974, I believe the guy said. So either way, we're going to try to lose about 150 pounds. Out of the nose, not exactly 150 pounds. We might lose 60 pounds on the nose, which is still really good. But in the middle of the car, we're going to drop maybe another 50 pounds, 70 pounds, what have you. So either way, I won't keep this long, guys. There's a lot of stuff to talk about, but I don't want to make this video any longer. If you guys really want me to touch on some more details, let me know. Share, like, subscribe. The Oldsmobile world is very kick your ass, so I don't really share my videos to any Oldsmobile pages. If you want to share it on your personal pages on social media, that'd be cool. If you got friends who would like what I got going on, share, like, subscribe. And if you guys want to follow me on Instagram, you can follow me as Copper Cutlass. But most importantly, guys, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. Again, I thought this year was going to be like a layback year, but with COVID-19, I think we all really need a distraction. And to keep my sanity, I kind of have to do something. So losing some weight out of the car is going to be a low book project. And in the spring, I think I'm actually going to rewire the entire car. That's a cheap kit too, and I'll talk about it later. So I'll let you guys go.